Thank you, everyone. You can download the song at the link in the chat box. Now, I would request Huda to introduce our panels.
Thank you so much. Good evening, one and all. Good afternoon.
Huda, you are on silent.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, good evening, everyone. Very happy to introduce this session. Welcome to all the panelists and all of the participants that are a part of this discussion. A very critical discussion at this point because we have seen a huge amount of pull from different kinds of stakeholders over the last 2 years, and we couldn't be at an appropriate time when this interest is there and people have realized that this is one way or the other a method or an approach to actually truly democratize and decentralize access to opportunities, services revolving around livelihoods. So I'll just be taking just 2 to 3 minutes of yours and then handing it over to Harish sir to sort of then introduce the panelists and move ahead. The challenge that we see today and these pictures that you see on the screen, right from the blacksmith blower that's actually doing the, making the equipment, agricultural equipment to
We
food
don't see
processing.
anything on the screen.
Sorry?
We don't see anything on the screen.
Oh, you don't see anything on the screen. Can you see it now? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so right from the blacksmith blower that's manually doing a lot of this work to food processing technologies that could have various levels of issues when it comes to access, either inefficiency or the not the right kind of financing. A lot of technologies, like you see the rope making picture there, they don't even exist for many of these livelihoods. So one of the drivers for a lot of these different applications that we have seen across the past 10 years that we have been working on this nexus of, how do you catalyze better livelihoods using energy as one of the critical drivers. One of the key drivers could be energy, and is energy in many ways that we have seen over the past 2 years as well. Whether it's access to clean energy, efficient technologies, better green built environments to actually improve productivity. All of these three factors combined with appropriate finance, training, etc., can be very powerful enablers for the most sort of marginalized populations to own these assets and to actually utilize these assets productively, right? So across these four sectors, whether it's agriculture and the other three sort of allied sectors, how do we make sure that the right kind of solutions are packaged and scaled in a country like India? This is just a quick brief on the kinds of, if you take a value chain approach across agriculture, all animal husbandry, whether it's on the input side, so your pumps, your sprayers, your seeders, your transplanters, or it's on the processing, distribution, or it's on that last mile food processing side. A huge amount of opportunities are, lay within these to actually make technology more efficient, package it with energies, provide the right kind of financing, so that these solutions are more independently used and accessed. Just some examples, whether it's sort of a rice huller, which is high in efficiency, packaged with solar, which actually makes it accessible to the most decentralized village or panchayat or farmer producer group that's operating, reduces operational costs in a huge way, right? This is an example of these larger capacities when it comes to actually processing machineries.
Is the slide moving?
Yeah, it's not moving. Okay, I'm going to keep it. Can you see my slide? Or it's sort of looking at cold storage systems. So cold storage systems where good infrastructure, finance, and support can actually lead to food security, reduction of wastage, as well as income increase, so that the farmers actually have a better leverage to negotiate. Right? So a lot of these type of technologies on different kinds of food processing systems, milling. One of the large opportunities is on the post-harvest side that we see, on the retail side that we see. This is a roti rolling machine combined with solar. And a lot of these entrepreneurs have taken up these solutions not because they are solar powered or because they're very efficient, but because there was a really good financing package provided to them, right? And that's how they've scaled, as well as really strong enterprises that are supplying and servicing these locally. And those are really the reasons why these solutions end up scaling, right? Again, on the post-harvest side, this is an example of a millet processing unit, which actually enabled the FPO to increase the turnover multifold and increase the number of members that they've had, right? So really kind of build reliable market linkages that the FPO was working with as well. Very similarly, across the dairy value chain, you have right from hydroponics to shaft cutters to milking machines to milk chillers. Across this value chain, again, energy can be a fairly significant driver towards transforming incomes and looking at drudgery within these value chains. I will stop there. Just hand it over to Harish sir and the panelists to really take over the discussion. But be it silk reeling, poultry, when we are able to combine technology and appropriate solutions with energy together with financing and training, we can actually further leverage and improve the different kinds of linkages that are available for last mile entrepreneurs and producer groups and JLGs as well. So I'll stop there. Harish, over to you. Can't hear you, Harish.
Thanks, Huda, for this introduction and Lewis. So I mean, thanks to TRIF for putting up this and asking me to moderate. Um, and I'll tell you an example that I came from Raichur yesterday. Raichur, for people who don't know, it's in northern part of Karnataka, where a lot of the people have moved to Bangalore as migrants. And it comes from one of the most backward districts in Karnataka, drought conditions and everything else. And we were working with the local administration to look at how many women-led enterprises. It's very interesting that COVID, in fact, led to increase in decentralized livelihood applications, and especially for women, roti rolling machines, silk weaving, sewing machines. The number of inquiries and number of interest that was based on democratization, that people were saying that we do have the markets to sell within a 50 kilometers or 80 kilometers radius, and that's decentralization at the best. And similar to what the video that TRIF showed in terms of pushing the concept of decentralization that led to democratization is what we see during the COVID. I cannot say post COVID because this keeps happening. The COVID, I don't know when it's going to be post COVID at all. The question is, decentralized energy is going to play a key role, and especially for a country where livelihoods is going to be very key to us. We now to really be serious about this. So also to the audience, I've asked my co-panelists to be brutally frank, because we all need the world to move forward, to leave aside their organizations, and we're truly speak on behalf of the voiceless and what needs to move forward. Yes, we have our own day jobs, but for today, we are looking at livelihoods of the poor and sustainability of this planet. So before I get into the discussion, can I first invite Mr. Charanjit Singh, who is from the Indian Forest Services, or from the state of Madhya Pradesh in 1990. Presently, he is the Joint Secretary of Rural Livelihoods and is looking after the Government of India's flagship program, the DAY, under the NRLM scheme. Sir, what are your initial comments on the presentation and the focus that Government of India is looking at, and the nexus between livelihoods and sustainable energy from your perspective?
Okay, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my ideas. So it's a really very relevant topic for us. As you have already mentioned that under the National Rural Livelihood Mission, so we are handling a very huge numbers. So I will just give you two numbers which you will you give an idea that how we are working. So we have got around 69 lakh SHGs, that is the self-help groups, which cover around 7.5 crore households. So these are from the rural poor all across India. So this is a very huge number. So So our objective is that we want to provide them the livelihoods. So we are working in various fields. So as you mentioned already that as we move from the production to the value chains, so many interventions are required where energy is a very, very important factor. But there are so many issues associated with the energy, which I just jotted down some points in the morning, which I think are very, very important, which will take this discussion also forward. First thing is we want that there should be inclusive development. Now, from the inclusive development, we want that the person who is standing last in the line, he or she need to be taken care of, whether they may be the primitive tribal groups or the very vulnerable communities. So we want to include them. Then there are issues of environmental sustainability also. So this is a very important factor. I think we need to address it somewhere. So as you mentioned in your presentation also, there are solar energy. So that is a very big source of energy. And government of India has already set a very ambitious target, as you must be knowing that 175 gigawatts by 2022. So this can also play a very important role. And the next thing I feel is the resource conservation. There are different type of resources available in the rural areas that I think need to be properly used. As you must be listening or hearing about so many things in the winters of the North India, that so much crop residue is being burned, there is so much pollution. But that is a very good resource also. If that is properly utilized, I think a lot of energy, biomass can be used for generation of energy also. So we need to develop some models on that. And the last thing I feel is that we need to create some institutions, or if some institutions have been created, we need to manage them in such a way that they are sustainable in the long run. So we don't need to intervene again and again. Once that institute start working, that should take care of itself and the community also, so that the sustainable development can be ensured. And the last thing is that no, I missed one topic. The last thing is that whatever we do, if we can increase the income, so that will be a win-win situation for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for setting the tone of this. I will. There is one point which I would bring back to Dhruvi later on about, especially the thing that you mentioned, long term. That question I will put up to Dhruvi later on. But first, Dhruvi, let me come back. Dhruvi Shah, she is the heads the CSR programs for the Axis Bank Foundation. She heads the program of Axis Bank Foundation. Has played multiple roles in. I've been part of the not-for-profit CSR arm of ABN AMRO, which was then rebranded as the Royal Bank of Scotland. Now has incredible experience in the livelihood domain, microfinance, not-for-profit management, and strategic communications. And what's your initial reaction to Huda's presentation about, and is that what you see in the sector and the focus? While we still talk about sustainable energy and livelihoods, is it gaining traction?
Uh, Hi, Harish. So it definitely, Harish, it is getting traction, but it is not getting traction to basis the opportunity it has and the aspiration and the potential it has. It is moving at a very, very small pace. To a large extent, we have seen pilots. We've been seeing pilots now for many years. So it hasn't really moved from a pilot phase to a mainstreaming of it, especially in the space of livelihoods. What we see today, so we've been doing rural livelihood for 10 years now. Where we see ourselves today, we see ourselves still standing at the border of it, where where we feel that now when we are talking of FPOs, when we're talking of local processing, the potential that we see of having power, it is extremely, I think it will be very, very empowering, both for the community and individuals to have access to low cost, renewable power so that they can now move up the value chain. The share in the livelihood can move up the value chain. There is potential to do processing. There are trainings. There are markets now available. Very rightly, when you said that COVID has brought this consciousness of local production, all of it is there, but somewhere the lack of power, lack of energy is sort of a big road bump there. A couple of reasons. One, we don't see scalable models. By scalable, I don't mean so much from the technology side, but more from the finance side. These are slightly higher investments that requires us to unlock the climate capital, that requires us to make a business case for it. I think that is what is required to be done to, I mean, I would not even, scaling up would probably come later, but we don't really have a very integrated model of livelihoods. We talk of energy as an alternate to your power, right? But we don't talk of it in the context of livelihood and the potential it has to get in that kind of income for the rural communities, increase their share in the value chain. We don't talk of it in that context. Our entire discussion is around, chalo, let's do cooking stuff so there is impact on the health. Let's do solar panels so that you can reduce diesel consumption. Let's do a grid. But we are not talking of it in the terms of the incremental livelihood that it can create for the community. And that, I feel, is a very missing piece in the conversation, in the way we are looking at livelihood plus or energy and livelihood. A simple thing like having a micro cold storage in a rural area can lead to so many other activities in that rural area, but we are not talking about it. And to be very honest, the cost of diesel on any activity, on the cost to the entrepreneur or to the SG is very, very high. So I think to that extent, that piece is missing in this whole livelihood piece.
Thanks, Dhruvi, thanks to Charanjit ji and Dhruvi ma'am to push in a lot of the challenges, right, which makes my job a little bit easier for the next set of questions. But before
Who's going to start?
So, what did you say, ma'am?
Yeah.
So next I would like to bring in Parifan, who is the Director of Power and Climate Initiative at the Rockefeller Foundation, which aims at scaling up renewable energy solutions to drive economic and social development. And previously has led advocacy and governance initiatives at Oxfam and Save the Children. Thanks so much for joining, Parifan. Now you've heard from Charanjit and G and Dhruvi ma'am. Parifan, what are where you have led this initiative for quite some time? You must have seen the good and the bad and the ugly side of it, right? So your views on where is the nexus today? And later on, I'll ask you some questions about your own role and how do you want to push those? Where do you see the nexus? Is it really out there, as I had asked Dhruvi ma'am?
I mean, thank you for that, Harish, and thank you for the question. Let me just say why we're doing this first.
Right.
I've been traveling to India for the last 10 years, and except for the last 1.5 years when international travel was impossible. But I started when hundreds of millions of people in India were not electrified to today, 99% of the households is electrified. So when we looked at this problem in India, the question that's still looming for us is energy consumption. The people who lived in rural Bihar consumes 20 times below national average. 20 times, I mean, think about that. And when we dig deeper into people who are connected to the grid, we found that only 60% of rural enterprises are connected to the grid, and still about 40% of them are still using diesel and other alternative sources of power. So we feel that overall there's a huge market size for introducing the distributed renewable energy solution. And some numbers been thrown out, anywhere between $40 billion to $100 billion market size. And so this is this is a new challenge, a problem that we're trying to solve. How do you get power to these rural enterprises, who together consumes over 1 billion liters of diesel per year. We know that this electrification approach will make climate change worse and is not designed to help communities to bounce back after the economic shock caused by the COVID-19 crisis. So when we looked at the distributed renewable energy systems, let me sort of break it down, because I think there are many solutions out there. There is anything that's as small as 5 to 10 kilowatt systems that can power rice mills or flour mills, things that another panelist has shown on the presentation earlier. But there's also a mini grid that can be sized anywhere between 30 to 100 kilowatt systems, even larger in Myanmar or in Indonesia or sub-Saharan Africa, where these could actually power large villages, towns, or the whole islands. And so there are many now sort of new solutions that are out there that are set up to power cold storage, agricultural processing units. And to the other panelists' point that the scale is an issue, right? And certainly so. I think that's the part that we yet to crack. In the last 5 years, we have enabled over 500 operating mini grids in India, Myanmar, and Africa, reaching 500,000 people and over 15,000 enterprises. And because of this, we're very encouraged to take this kind of solution to scale, partnering with like the IKEA Foundation. I'm glad that Jeff is also on this panel, where we wanted to really take a $1 billion commitment to provide clean energy to rural enterprises globally. But energy, as people say here, isn't going to be, energy itself isn't going to double rural household income and improve economic opportunities for women. Households and small businesses need access to affordable financing as well as cost-effective technologies, so they can buy home appliances and commercial and industrial equipment for productive use. And I think this is why it's so important to work with partners to really bring this nexus of energy, food, water, health, and other issues at the center of the planning, so that we have a coordinated investment and an approach to not just lighting up households, but it's about lighting up the economies, rural economies that can create more jobs, produce more goods, and feeding in the agricultural value chains that has been extended to villages.
Thanks, Maripun, for bringing that perspective of coordination and finance, also, which I would ask this question to a couple of your other panelists, and how would they react to that challenge that you have thrown is that exists. But before that, let me come to Jeff. Jeff leads the renewable energy program at the IKEA Foundation, which has a portfolio of 18 renewable energy partners globally. And previously, he used to be at the Dune Foundation, which was focused on clean energy investments in East Asia, in East Africa and India. And he's been a longtime friend. Jeff, some of these words might be very music to your ears, inclusive, that Charanjit ji used, end user perspective. And you have been pushing that for some time, that if livelihoods have to succeed. So taking from Huda's presentations and the comments of all of the rest panelists, where and how do you feel very positive about the nexus that you have been pushing for?
Yeah, I feel quite positive. I mean, these are really good examples that Huda gave, where the nexus of poverty alleviation and climate come together. And that's quite new in a sense, that these dual challenges are brought together, and that's how we would see it as well. So we really see energy as catalytic for inclusive development. So we definitely have a sort of a system design issue here. We have huge numbers of people still in poverty, and we're dealing with climate change. So it's quite important to really take a step back and to see, are we doing the right things to alleviate these two big problems? And that's what drives our work. We're very much committed to tackling poverty while fighting and coping with climate change. So it does, I mean, it's obviously energy helps to end drudgery. It's something that optimizes, it creates efficiencies. The thing that worries me a little bit is that, are we doing it all perfectly wrong, so to speak? So we had discussions earlier about the introduction of a productive use of renewable energy technology like solar water pumps. And it definitely means an efficiency step. It means that a farmer doesn't have to bring buckets of water to his cropland or her cropland. So there's an efficiency step, but it could also mean that if you introduce solar water irrigation, that you're creating a new problem when it comes to water conservation. And so I think we're hopeful. We think that energy can be a catalyst to solving these two big challenges of poverty and climate change. We're very excited about an end user focus where does it really benefit the small business or the small farmer in the rural community? But we definitely have to take a bigger holistic look at things, that we could be offering incremental change, but is it really changing the system? And I think that's where we as foundations have to look seriously at the work that we're doing. It's never done in a linear fashion, right? It's not input, output done, but we're actually working within a dynamic system that if we change something on the one end, it could create some serious issues on the other end.
Thanks, Jeff, for bringing in the concept of ecosystem approach and a holistic thought process for any intervention that we do in the livelihoods. It's not a product-based or a technology-focused interventions, and that's why I'm glad you brought up the answer of water pump. Water pump is, as we discussed in the morning, that it's not the silver bullet. It's a concern of water efficiency and utilization of water, and water pump is just one of the solutions inside that. So let's be a little more pushy and provocative in a way. Coming to Charanjit Saab, you've now heard three of them. And every time when livelihoods don't happen, there's always a finger pointed towards government, that government has to do. Government has a certain rules and regulations and has financial regulations, but there is also a big role of other stakeholders. Now you have three stakeholders here right in front, two international who are very much interested in India. One, a local stakeholder who's pushing for obviously financial resources. What would you tell them that would add to the complementary efforts? Because today what happens is somebody innovates, somebody implements, and everything becomes projects and programs. And then we have a lot of graveyard of solutions in a country like ours because there is a disorientation of the stakeholders. From your perspective, what would be the best? And just looking at the three large stakeholders, and when Paripan said $1 billion that they are committed towards climate and livelihoods and sustainable energy, from your perspective, from your desk, what do you expect these stakeholders to do?
Okay, you have asked me a very tough question, but no problem. I will try to answer it to the best of my capabilities. And somebody asked in the chat box also that how we are. So first I will answer that because that is also a very dear question to me. That's how we are addressing the issue of climate change in the agriculture. So that will answer many questions. So what we are doing is that I mentioned in the beginning also, that we need to develop the institutions, or we need to strengthen the institutions so that solutions can be long-term and sustainable also. So to address this climate change, we are working with our self-help group women through community resource persons. So we have developed this cadre of around 3 lakh women, more than 3 lakh in the country. Those who stay in the village and provide 24/7 hand holding. So they are working in the agriculture sector, livestock, etc., and they tell what type of crop you should sow, how to take care of it, and so many guidance they provide. They provide guidance. There are specific guidance for livestock sector also. So that was my concern, that we need to develop the institutions. Now I come to your question. That is regarding the this how we can leverage the strength of each, because government no doubt can function up to certain extent only, but to solve a big problem we need cooperation of everybody. So we in fact welcome everybody, that in whatever capacity they want to work with us, we are ready to work with them. No, in fact, we are working on one proposal where we can work with the private sector or civil society organizations. So we ask them, you just come with a proof of concept to us. We are ready to work. So what type of cooperation you need, we are ready to give that cooperation. Because in the development of the rural area, it's a win-win situation for everybody. It's not only for the government. So a businessman can also earn a good amount of business from that area. So I think we need innovative solutions, and so we need to think out of the box. So we need to go out of our comfort zones and need to find some solutions. And we are more than willing that whatever type of solution is suggested, we are ready to work on that.
Thank you, Charanjit sir, for opening that and making clear the government's role of the partnership that you have actually played. Charanjit sir has consistently in the last intervention and has said of long-term institutional funding. Dhruvi ma'am, if I took from your friend, and not about Axis Bank and but somewhere the local philanthropy or CSR are not structured to look at long-term investments. It's very much a project-based March 31st deadline, paisa khatam hona, money has to be finished, etc. If that is the case, and livelihoods, as Jeff said, from an ecosystem perspective, needs to happen, and climate that Paripan actually mentioned is a long-term solution. How do we, if livelihoods in our country have to succeed, there has to be a lot of failures in terms of innovations, failures in finance. Is CSR actually ready for that? You're on mute, ma'am.
So
This,
when we say CSR, I think it's not fair to generalize everything. A lot of what we see as successes today has come out from support by funding organization or CSR. Uh, so, that's how the ecosystem is. There is a very variable CSR ecosystem, but there is a very stable civil society system, right? It is the one that is propelling a lot of piloting, a lot of experiments, both failures and successes, which is leading to what we can call quote unquote mainstream programs. So a lot of it has come from the civil society organization. The most ideal situation will be a consistent funding from a set of donors to a set of civil society organization. That doesn't happen. That's it. That's reality. Why? What is a different different thing altogether. But having said that, CSR is never going to be able to. I'm not saying never. I mean, I don't want to talk on behalf of everybody, but the kind of investments that are required, a CSR fund cannot fulfill it. At best, what it can do is create pilots, have success stories, talk about success stories, talk about failures, but create models that can then be scaled up. And to that extent, Harish, I feel there is work happening. I think what is not happening is we are not able to contextualize it rightfully with the livelihood opportunity and potential. We talking of energy is not mainstream today. If I look at my world, right? If I look at the CSR world, talking about energy, yes, talking about climate is, talking about climate change is, but talking about energy as a key component of it I don't think there are enough dialogues happening about it, right? So before we look at funding, before we look at consistency in partnership, I think what we also need to parallelly do, and which happens in a lot of development issues, is to have consistent dialogues around it. Those dialogues then lead to partnerships. Those dialogues then lead to everybody moving in the same direction. uh, we don't talk of energy as a huge issue in our work in livelihoods. We don't. That's a fact. We don't talk of successes. We don't talk of failures, but we know the potential and we know the opportunity. So I feel that at least a consistent dialogue that we have, let's say for agriculture, let's say we have for agri-allied activities, I think that needs to happen for the energy space. Once that starts, there is more attention, more traction, which can then create more pathways for everybody else to move in. I think that is what the CSR donors and the civil society can do together. That's what I feel. Yeah.
Thanks, Dhruvi, for laying that out. I'll come to part of what you said to Jeff. Before that, I'll go to Parivan. See, the question is what happens. There's some look at some criticisms that some of the international monies that come in it takes is that India is a microcosm of world's problems. That means it's also a microcosm of world's solutions. And many a thing that the problems and solutions in the livelihoods and the sustainable energy space, that a lot of things we have failed in the country, but a lot of things have succeeded. But what we don't see is the link between the success and failures of the other developing countries, right? Because somewhere we get stuck into these country boundaries rather than sectoral boundaries, right? How can an institution like the Rockefeller actually play a role of ironing that and saying that when you and IKEA are very much now in bed to look at these and taking livelihoods to a large scale, that means we need to start breaking country boundaries and more getting sectoral livelihoods. And that's when scale, because what has failed in Mali, I don't need to do it in Sundarbans, for example, because poverty is poverty. So where do you think can that push happen, Parivan, so that this can, the link between sustainable energy and livelihoods can really scale? Otherwise, we'll keep doing pilots, as Dhruvi mentioned.
I think we're on the cusp of scale in India. But before I say that, let me just say that, in fact, I mean, because we're operating globally, our programs are in Asia, in South Asia, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and now we're launching new programs in Latin America. We started here first, India. So a lot of learning in India has actually informed our partners, power company, and development partners in other geography. And it created that cycle learning loop that when we take this knowledge and failure from India, apply it elsewhere in other geographies, we take that back to India again. So I think it is a perfect scenario on that. I think for India, in the last 10 years, we've been through, this long journey of how do you scale up the distributed renewable energy system? Because I think the key word in your panel here is sustainable energy. Many projects that have been piloted, very innovative, but they're not scalable or they're not sustainable because there's a long-term sort of O&M issues over a long period of time. And so that created a lot of challenges with the system. So I would say that the learning cycles need to happen even for the projects in India. And I think what we came to realize, whether it's in India or elsewhere, is that for distributed renewable projects like mini grids, we can't just finance 10 or 20 enterprise development in villages. That's, so I think to Jeff's point, it's an incremental growth. We have to link the agricultural value chains and bring that into the villages so that when productive use enterprises that have been incubated and are connected to either mini grids or solar rooftop, they're able to export their produce up the value chains forward linkages. I feel that this learning is so crucial because we tend to make the same mistakes in other geography. And that's something that we just have to do a lot more in our work in India.
Yeah, and thanks. I mean, which is where collaboration between the funding that comes from abroad and the leveraging of local funding experiences is something that we see would lead to a robust scale up, I would say. Jeff, Dhruvi mentioned the word that that yes, there's a lot of talk of climate, but hardly there's a link that talks toward livelihood, sustainability, and climate, because somewhere people think that the poor take the brunt of climate, but in terms of the overall funding, climate funding does not really get into the whole livelihood space because it's developmental. But you, from your perspective in your chair, you've been pushing that agenda, saying that it's one and the same thing. Today's adaptation will become tomorrow's mitigation. Right. So Jeff, could you so that people, the audience, don't start differentiating that, oh, this is this side, that's climate, and this development.
Yeah, so we also had that discussion about what is our work? Is it adaptation or mitigation? And I think that whole discussion is a little bit outdated and a bit artificial. So if you're offering renewable energy solutions for those living in rural areas that don't have energy access, I think we've tried to position it as a long-term play, that the reason why there is sort of this push for grid connect and based on some, at least at that time, some cheaper fossil fuel sources, with a understandable agenda for development. I think that agenda didn't think of the long-term consequences. Again, it's sort of what I referred to before. It's are we looking at the system, or are we looking at some very short-term incremental optimizing steps, or are we really thinking about the long term? So the long term would say, okay, listen, I'll never forget a report about India's cooling needs. If the cooling needs are all done with the existing energy infrastructure, which is very fossil fuel based, it would be game over for the planet. So I think, while understandable, some short-term gains for India and its cooling needs would be sacrificing the long-term stability of the planet, you could say. So I think that's where we just need to be smart about how we're allocating resources. Is there a long-term systems play that we can tap into? So the discussion that we've always had is, listen, yes, we understand you have to tackle climate change and reduce emissions in those countries where they've historically been at the cause of climate change. But we also need to marry that with tackling energy poverty or tackling energy transition issues in countries where you might say, well, India average climate emission output is on average per person 1 ton, while in the Netherlands, for example, where I live, it's 10 tons. I think that's a little bit, I think you have to do both, basically. And I think we have to get beyond the adaptation mitigation issue and say, we have to think about long-term consequences for everyone.
Again, it goes back to long-term building of processes, and which, because we moved away from the long-term processes to in this world of instant gratification of Twitter, Facebooks, and project-based thinking, which is what somewhere there's a conflict. So coming back to Charanjit Sabji, there's something that Parivan mentioned, finance. There's also a question that was related to, can we make these interventions affordable by using carbon offsets? But in a country like ours, where the whole agricultural revolution which took place because of large-scale affordable financing by NABARD and the RR regional rural banks, is there a way where we revitalize that relationship, where the way the agricultural revolution took place led to that? Can we not, between NRLM and NABARD, start looking at this decentralized energy revolution focused on livelihoods? Like you have 40% priority sector lending. Can we not push for NABARD via NRLM and NRL to say that 5% of that portfolio should be for renewable energy livelihoods? Would not that change the needle, using the monies of Axis Bank, Rockefeller, and IKEA for mitigating the risks of innovation and payments?
Okay, thank you very much. Now you touched one very important topic also, that is the financing. No doubt the financing is very important, but I feel that we need to develop some innovative models also of financing also. So one one fit can't be applied to everything in our country. It's a very diverse country and the problems are also very different. So I think we need to develop certain financial models. So now, no doubt the role of NABARD is very important. And here also, if we not only in the NABARD, other financial institutions, like we were in discussion with this Samanati, they are ready to finance up to 5 lakh rupees per FPO as a credit guarantee. So I think such type of initiatives are also very important. So I think we need to work with such institutions also, and they can come up with good models also. So before I go further, I will just want to touch two topics also which I missed somewhere. That the second thing is we should not think that we know everything and the people who are living in the rural areas, they don't have any knowledge. I feel opposite. I think the traditional knowledge is more important, and that knowledge also need to be compiled and leveraged properly. And the second thing I feel, no, it's my personal opinion, that we need to do the proper communication also of the knowledge, that these types of technologies are available in the rural areas. So sometimes I feel that they don't know about the alternatives available. And I think that if these types of alternatives reach to them, I am 100% sure that they will find some way out to adopt that thing also. Thank you.
Thank you, Charanjit Sab. So, if I would like to segue into to Dhruvi ma'am. See what Charanjit ji said about, there seems to there is incredible knowledge in terms of whether today a lot of us, what we do is we come up with a solution and we go to the rural areas and try to fit a problem to it, right? It's not about, okay boss, can we create partnerships in the rural areas and create solution together, where I bring in some expertise, they bring in some expertise, together we have come up with a solution that is good for both of us. It's not like unke liye it's good for them and it's not good for us kind of attitude that we go, and in a society how because, and see, one of the challenges that we have faced, Dhruvi, is that, and we keep saying that money always goes to PowerPoint and Excel, right? And it never goes to the people who can actually innovate. And how do we break those barriers in a country like ours, where the true innovator and an entrepreneur in a Oriya speaking or Bengali speaking can access the monies that we all have?
Right. Very valid question. And see, these are the questions we really need to ask ourselves and in the ecosystem. Indigenous knowledge is important. In a solution like energy, the indigenous processes would be more important than the technology, because technology is not indigenous to them. It's not local, right? But the way you manage, the way you distribute it, the way you own it, those processes need to be what is locally conducive. But here comes the challenge then is, if you have a financial model which requires, let's say, credit, for example, those come with their own frameworks, ownership, and the risk. So the way finance gets designed or financial products gets designed for a solution come with a risk assessment of a financial risk, right? So to that extent, there could be complementarily, if you find out, if we can figure that out in terms of innovation. But those are the gaps that I see when it comes to adaptation. So for example, not adaptation as in mitigation or adoption, but adoption. So for example, let's say if I need to put a solution and I'm getting this finance, a lot of processes will then be decided by the giver of the finance. And that is something we are seeing in the FPO today. I mean, you have a very simple, you have an equated monthly return wherein your harvest is going to come twice in a year. You know, this is the basic gap between the supplier of finance and the user of finance, right? Now, these are things where the indigenous knowledge about cycles and processes need to come in place. Technology will come from outside, but a technology which is not experimented, which you don't allow the community to experiment with it, does not get adopted by them. You can't simply say, okay, now use this. You need to allow the community to own it. You need to allow the community to experiment with it and also allow failures, right? Now, as an ecosystem, we need to allow that. And to that extent, CSR money is good to set up what we call as workable models. And we've seen that happening. We've seen solar pumps working. We've seen solar-based irrigation system working. We've seen solar-based atta chakki working. But it doesn't happen in one go. There are so many permutation combinations that happen. In order to adopt modern stuff, so many pilots had to be carried out for alternates before the community could accept it, right? So that's the system we need to be ready for when we are trying to create seamless pathways for getting technology to the grassroots. So maybe for a thing like this, the space for experimentation and piloting and failures needs to be little more than what one could say for an agri solution or an agri product.
Thanks, Ruvidi. Thanks, Ruvidi, for doing that, because I'm going to ask this next question to Jeff. I know Jeff will kill me for it, but anyway, I'm going to ask him. Jeff, what Ruvidi said and what Chandriji said, right? The failures, and we've been talking about it for years, and you've been. How does the overall funders around the world change? Because more and more they're getting more restrictive in their concept of the measurement is done in terms of log frame, and what is the other one called as what is the theory of change, and you see, all is like an English jargon that has been pushed towards many of the grantees in the rural areas. Half the time you have to have half the resources to just monitor those. Where will experimentation happen? I mean, Jeff, where do you think the philanthropic scene has to be also be innovative and risk taking?
Yeah, that definitely has to happen. So I mean, it's something we struggle as well. So when you deploy any kind of money, you have to show a certain amount of accountability, right? So I think there's sort of often, I think, a false sense of control when you have things like theory of change or log frame or KPIs. But it is an understandable instrument, and it can be very good as a proxy for progress. But I think it doesn't say everything. So I think there was a really nice story about Russell's chicken. I don't know if I've ever told you about it, but like the chicken gets fed every day by the owner, and the chicken thinks, hey, that's the KPI. That's like the sign that I'm going to get fed because the owner comes along. But then the chicken forgot about the context that when it comes to Christmas time or Thanksgiving or whenever the festival holiday comes around, that it's time for, you know, for dinner time for the boss. So that doesn't, you know, these are great to have KPIs, but if you're not aware of the context and the system that you're operating in, it just doesn't make sense. So I like to tease our colleagues that are obsessed about KPIs and theories of change about Russell's chicken. But no, I mean, yes, it's good. It helps with accountability. It shows sort of that you're progressing, but it doesn't say everything.
Thanks, Jeff, for being very open about it. Everyone, I know it's 4 minutes. I want to ask in the last from the in the moderate question answer session is you have Mr. Charanjit, who represents the NRLM and part of the government of India, and you're coming up with an ambitious program with IKEA Foundation. What is one wish list that you would have for Mr. Charanjit here?
Thank you for that question, Harish, and Sanchit, thank you for listening. We have certainly the ambition to support power companies to build up to 10,000 distributed mini grids in India. That's going to spread over 10,000 villages. And this number would probably, we're raising our ambition every day. And so these numbers will probably increase over time. But as I said, energy is not the only solution. So we would definitely would like to encourage the government to look at providing and channeling funding and support to rural enterprises who are based in spread out in these 10,000 villages across UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, and Odisha, to be able to start their businesses, expand their businesses, and particularly focus on women, because women enterprises are facing real challenge in terms of getting credits and support to start their businesses. And I feel like it's the right time now to step up the support from the government, but also from all the other actors, to really think of outside the box on how do we do that much more effectively.
Thank you, Pariban. So Charanjit Sahab, just a 10-20 second reply to that.
No, it's very difficult to reply in 10-20 seconds, but no doubt we need to find innovative solutions, as I told earlier, and that's my wish list also. So how we can make more partners, because only then we can address such issues.
Thank you, Charanjit Sahab, and thanks, Anishi. I wanted to be saying that if you see the players in now on the screen, whether the Rockefeller, the IKEA, Axis, Charanjit, Anish Sahab, who has come in, and individually, I mean, forget the backgrounds or companies that they represent. I think everybody is very, very interested to make this needle move. Intention is right. There are financial instruments that just now, as Pariban and Jeff announced, Charanjit ji clearly mentioned the whole intention and the focus of NRLM in the next 5 years. Organizations like TRF who are pushing to make sure that the connection between the government policies and what the ground actually needs, so that the question that was raised about grassroots level enterprises and innovators getting the chance to truly make long-term solutions that are sustainable holistically from a social perspective as well as from a climate perspective. And I think it's high time, I mean, as this group has clearly mentioned, stated, it's high time to iron out that there's no difference between a poor in Africa or Ethiopia or India or Bihar or Bangladesh. I think it's time we got together, and if we have to truly, and I think 2030, I don't think so we should be negative that we are not going to. The SDG 7 and SDG 8 can clearly show a pathway to other nexuses to happen. Over to you, Anish Saab. I think
No, this is fabulous, Harish. And from where I am sitting, the arc from Paripahan, Harish, Jeff, Chanjit Sahab, and Dhruvi is that the moon eats moon. And as auspicious that, moon is, between this arc, you have the answer to India's livelihood and sustainable energy solution. Just 4 days back, we had the Earth Overshoot Day. And this is the decade of ecosystem restoration. And I couldn't, imagine the ideas that we have discussed today has been, breathtaking in its sweep and comprehensive in its sweep. And we are very blessed to be working with Charanjit sir on NRLM with 80 million women across India. And if we have the right financing, Dhruvi is supporting one program in UP, sir, with UP SRLM, Dhruvi is supporting that integration and intensification of livelihood work. And there are opportunities with Jeff, keen interest on energy as both enabler of livelihoods and energy production itself being, a source of livelihoods. And with Harish ji and Selco being there, and Rockefeller, you couldn't ask for a more willing, what should I say, intense change coalition being there. And with this kind of change commitment and change coalition, I'm sure we will be rolling out, and Harish Huda, we have that commitment. We have set in motion sustainable energy for rural rejuvenation, resilience, and livelihood intensification. So we will step up. And this is what, the theme of our colloquy is Excelsior Communis. That is forward together, forward and upward. Actually, Excelsior is both for forward and upward. And that's what, Sir Charanjit, sir, we will bring in this, intensity of conversation that we had to NRLM, sir. In your guidance, we will together see that, sir, we have increased livelihood intensity across all the women SHGs, sir. Thank you very much, Harish, for such an intense and wonderful conversation. And we intend to take up all these ideas, and between two of us, we have the enough fuel and energy to translate it on ground, and we are committed to translate it on ground. Thank you very much. And the intense conversation that I saw on chat and Q&A, we couldn't handle all of them, but we will, and bring all that together. Thank you very much, Harish ji, for curating this and putting this session together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
With that, we'll close today. We are short overshoot by 4 minutes. So Earth Overshoot Day reminds us we have less time on our hand. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.